Marie, it's really wonderful to have this opportunity to interview you as part of the interviews of all the stages from our recent conference. So I thank you for the honor of being able to talk with you.
It's my pleasure, Jane.
Why don't we start out with, you can talk a little bit about why did you decide to become a nurse and when?
Oh, that's one of my favorite things. I pretty much decided when I was 5 years old. I was in the hospital, and my parents didn't know about hospitals. Nobody in the family had ever been in a hospital, and so they didn't know what to tell me. And so they pretty much just told me that I was going into a big building. And I stayed there for a month, and every time they came, there was a very painful procedure that was done to me. And it had to do with injecting me with my parents' whole blood into my muscle. And it was a very painful procedure, but I associated it with my parents, and I was confused, and I was hurt, and I didn't understand why I was there and why every time they came I hurt so badly. And there was a nurse there. Her name was Florence Marie Fischer. And I don't understand this association at all, but she used to color in my coloring book. She'd sit in my crib and she'd color in my coloring book. And when she did, she'd color on the side of her crayon, and it made a noise. And when I colored, it was straight down on the crayon, and it didn't make any noise. And there was something about having Florence Marie Fischer there coloring and having that noise that was, it ended up feeling that I felt cared for. It ended up that I felt cared for. And at some point shortly after that, I thought about, it would be wonderful to spend my life being able to care for other people, because it was such a special feeling for me. And that was pretty much it. I got doctor nurse kits when I was a little, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 for Christmas, and I'd throw away the doctor part and I'd play with the nurse kit. I never wanted to be a doctor. It was always be a nurse.
Right.
So I feel so blessed, Jane. I just feel like I watch my adult children struggling with their career choices and thinking about going back to school and studying something else. And I see so many people in jobs that are unsatisfactory, frustrating, debilitating of their spirit. And I just feel so fortunate that I've always known what I wanted to do. And I've always been pretty much satisfied with my career.
Well, many, many, many people look up to you as a leader in nursing. And if the definition of a leader includes the concept of influencing the behavior of others, when do you think you realized that you were a leader?
The funny part of that question, the answer to that question, is that when I was a student nurse, I was a very compliant, obedient young Catholic girl. And I was in a Catholic nurses training program, Catholic hospital, and I really pretty much followed the rules, and life was pretty black and white for me at that period of time. And on my evaluations, there would always be this comment: every single clinical program I went through has leadership potential, has leadership potential. And I didn't know what that meant, and I didn't want to be different than the other kids and the other people in the program. I remember my last rotation was the OR, and I said to the supervisor finally, what does that mean, and what do I have to do to get the word potential off of there, because it doesn't feel right. And people saw something in me that I didn't see. I remember when I went through my preceptorship in the undergraduate program, getting my bachelor's here at the U, the preceptor talked about my strong leadership qualities, and I didn't feel that at all. I don't think I really felt it in my career until sometime when I was functioning as assistant director at the university, handling special projects. I was beginning to work with administration. I was beginning to understand how things happened, how to make things happen. And I was beginning to fit the pieces together and to see what my role could be in making things happen differently than the way they were. And it was that opportunity to learn from pretty effective administrators and the freedom that I had in that position, that the pieces finally began to fit in place, and I began to see myself as having a career, for one thing, and being a positive influence, secondly.
Great. Can you describe a situation where you felt you had to take a stand that was controversial or unpopular? And what was it that made you feel like you needed to speak out?
Well, I think there's a lot of small incidents or anecdotal experiences that come to my mind. But I think the one that may be the most important is the whole beginning of primary nursing, because there were a lot of people who said it wouldn't work, who, when we would start describing what was happening, they would say, that can't work. My own director of nursing didn't understand it for probably the first year. And she kept saying to me, well, who supervises the LPN, when I would tell her what we were doing on this project unit. And she went away then to do a clinical sabbatical, studying the role of the clinical nurse specialists, and came back and said, what are you doing? People are asking me about primary nursing. Every place I go to study the clinical nurse specialist, they're asking me about what you're doing. I said, I've been trying to explain it to you. And she said, well, I am going to go and sit on station 32 and see if I can figure out what's really happening. And she did that on her first day back, her very first day back from sabbatical. She spent 2 hours sitting at the desk, and she called me into her office after that, and she said, I understand perfectly. Everything is okay. But that was just one small example of people saying to me, everybody from physicians to educators to researchers, this can't work, it's going to have to cost more money. And the strength to continue to think it through and learn how to respond effectively to those concerns and objectives of people was the practice, was seeing the effect in patient care. And it was such a remarkable experience to see that transformation. And to see the impact on patient care, that I was driven to continue to study, to think it through, to get at the principles, to find out how to respond to the objections and to the speculations that people had.
Through all of that time, who was helpful to you? Who supported you?
The staff and the people involved in the project. We had quite a strong team of people involved in the project, from the staff to committee members. Hospital administration was very, very supportive. The hospital administration at that time had come in with the fresh ideas about decentralized decision making, and they could see how primary nursing was a specialized application of that. And they were quite proud of what we were doing. On the other hand, the majority of my colleagues in the nursing department, the majority of the faculty, either didn't want to hear about it, thought it was a flash in the pan, expected it to go away, talked about the Hawthorne effect in a derogatory way, and simply really weren't interested.
Was this a similar experience when primary nursing was being implemented in other institutions around the country? Somewhat.
I don't think it was ever quite as strong as the very first time here. And you know, and as I experienced helping other people implement it, I kind of knew how to deal with some of those problems.
Anticipate them.
Right. I'll never forget, we were implementing it at a major hospital in Los Angeles, and they had a diploma school affiliated there, and the faculty asked for a meeting with the internal coordinator and I, the external coordinator, and we sat down with the faculty, and they thought it was just a wonderful thing that we were doing this project on primary nursing, and would we be willing to undo it so that they could have the student nurses learn team leading, please?
Right.
We said, sorry, we can't undo it. It's like you can't put people back in a box after they've once gotten out.
Right.
They were quite upset.
What do you think is different about being a leader today than it was 30 years ago?
You know, I'm not sure that there's that much different about being a leader. I think there's a lot different about being an administrator manager. The technical knowledge you need to have in order to function successfully in a high-level executive position is, I think, more rigorous now than it was 30 years ago. But I have a feeling that, you know, just like some of the elements of patient care are the same now as they were 30 years ago, that the major elements of leadership are the same now as they were 30 years ago. You know, simple things like being willing to follow as a leader. You know, being willing to listen to the staff and accept the integrity of their experience.
That whole servant leader
Exactly.
thing. Right.
And that's not new.
Right.
Jay Hall, back in the 1930s, was a leadership theorist who talked about we needed to restructure our organizations and society around the concept of expecting competence rather than expecting incompetence. You know, so I'm not sure that this is new, the basic elements of good leadership. But I think many of the complexities of the institution, the speed with which the world is moving now, all of those elements come in to complicate the role and the use of those skills.
Right. What advice would you give to graduating seniors in nursing today?
About nursing?
Right.
You know, I think there's a real interesting thing going on, Jane. We saw a little bit of it in the summit with the response to my 15-minute remark. I went to Magnet the following week and have had an overwhelming response to things that I've been saying for like 5 years now. I spoke to a class of post-bac students and master's students earlier this week. And what I said to them is based on the kind of response I've been getting to the kind of discussions I've been having for some time now, the recent response. And that is, I think we're at a point in time right now in society where people are seeking a deeper meaning. And I find that the things that I talk about, the covenant with society, the privilege we have of interacting with humans at their most vulnerable, are resonating with nurses as at a very deep level of their experience. And I think it's because as a society right now, we're looking for something other than crass materialism and superficial sound bites. And so to the students that I spoke to earlier this week, I encouraged them to pay attention to the privilege that they have in interacting with someone who needs their expertise and being able to provide that in a way that is helpful to another human being, to take the time to reflect on the privilege that we have to interact with human beings in that capacity. So I think what I would encourage students to do is to try to be present in their practice and to not recognizing that for some period of time the technical skills are going to overwhelm their consciousness. But as soon as they begin to feel comfortable with those technical skills, to begin then to pay attention and to be present to the deeper meanings of nursing practice, so that they can reward themselves, so that they can feel the joy and satisfaction from those professional interactions and the trust that we have with society, from society. You know, I think it's all there for us if we are conscious and deliberate about looking for it. It's there. But we have to make the choice that we want to honor and value it. And that's the advice I would give to a student. Pay attention.
Now there were close to, I think, 2,000 people at that Magnet conference. And quite a few people who were there have spoken to me over the last couple of weeks and really felt that your presentation was really transformational for very many people who were at that meeting. What do you think, and it may be similar to what you've just said of what you would tell newly graduating nurses, but these are folks working in Magnet hospitals or applying for Magnet status who really were emotionally impacted with your comments. Can you talk a little bit about what the meaning of that was and what your message was that was so impactful on folks who are the best of the best?
Yeah. I think part of it is that I let them know enough about who I am that there's an identification with me as a speaker. By talking about the beginning of primary nursing and what I learned along the way in language that in a speaking style that is not a lecture. I think there is, when it works well, as it did at Magnet, there is a sense of connectivity. And the fact that I don't use PowerPoint and I don't use handouts and I don't have people following along allows them to be more open to hearing the spoken word and the meanings behind it. The transformation, I think, comes from what's in their heart, and that I've learned how to speak about what's in our heart universally as nurses in ways that allows them to get there, to be there, and that's the transformation. It's something that I think many times they've just been distant from, and they're surprised to find out what's there, and they're glad to find out what's there, and I think that's what the transformation is about.
And what do you think has moved you from primary nursing as a way to deliver good comprehensive nursing care to the message that you're now giving?
You know, I'm not exactly sure. Some willingness on my part, some sense of security on my part, security that I wasn't going to fail at connecting, you know, practice with, maybe it's spirituality, being open to the oneness of the universe and our place in it, and feeling a little bit comfortable beginning to talk about that without being hokey. I think that I've known other people and some of my good friends who agree with me on a lot of these issues, who when they start talking about it end up, you know, people back away from it because it sounds hokey, and for some reason that I don't know why. I've just slowly begun to build. First time I did it, Jane, I'll never forget it. I thought to myself, oh, what must they be thinking about what I'm saying here, because this isn't the way we talk. And I realized after a couple of sentences, it was about Nightingale's values and their importance in the world today, that the audience had stopped breathing. I mean, they didn't just stop moving, they stopped breathing. You know how the audience is usually rustling around a little bit? It was still. It was just so still. I thought, oh my goodness, either they think I'm nuts or this is really touching them. And it's just been a gradual process of becoming more and more comfortable going deeper and deeper into these meanings. The book by Barbara Dawsey about Nightingale, Mystic and Healer, that opened up a lot for me too. And it's easy to get into this stuff by talking about the kind of person Nightingale was. Brilliant intellectually and a phenomenal spiritual being, non-religious but extremely spiritual. So, you know, that's a doorway that is a legitimate way to get into talking about this with nurses. Right.
And it really is the next step with primary nursing.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's so connected.
Yeah, well, I think the whole issue of relationship-based practice is what, you know, and I don't know if I mentioned this to you or not, when I was in Hong Kong a couple of weeks ago, one of the leaders there said, you know, wouldn't it be wonderful if we didn't even have to use the label primary nursing, if that was what nursing is? And I think that that's where we're getting to with relationship-based practice, that should always be what nursing is. If it isn't about a relationship, it isn't about nursing.
Right. What do you think has been the professional contribution that you've made of which you're most proud?
Wow. In a weird way, it's running a business for 25 years, because I was such a non-business person when I started consulting, and I was just talking to my daughter tonight, who's an accountant, who was an accountant in my company for about 7 years and now has worked in a number of other places, and she was complaining about the place she's working at now, and I said, and it's about the software that they're using for accounting. They're using the wrong software and they won't change because this is cheap. And I said, well, at least we did that right, didn't we? She said, we did so much right in that company. It wasn't about making money beyond what we absolutely needed, but it was about doing the right thing. And it was a great feeling of success for me to realize somewhere along the way in running the business that we could run a successful business and not lose our values. That was a big question mark for me when I started business. Was I going to have to do things for the money rather than because it's the right thing to do? So that would be one answer.
Right.
And the whole thing with primary nursing and the ability that I had, the gift I was given to be able to understand that change we made at a level of fundamental principles that allowed it to be transferred to other settings and other cultures, so that it wasn't just something we did. And I think that's a really important point for change agents, is to not be so concerned with telling people exactly how you did something, but to understand how what you did relates to more fundamental principles that allow for generalization. I think there's an important point in there, and I don't know that I'm expressing it as well as I could, but it's so easy to end up describing a project and writing an article about a project and then expecting people to just take that experience of the project and apply it without doing the hard work of understanding the ideas, the concepts, the principles behind that experience.
Right.
And that's, I think, what allowed primary nursing to move in the way that it did.
Now, of all the sages, I think you were the only one who has been entrepreneurial in terms of starting a business. And you started a business when it was highly unusual for nurses to go into the consulting business or go into business for themselves. Can you talk a little bit about how that was, striking out unknown territory, or who supported you in this?
It was very scary, because I had gone through a personal experience that was pretty traumatic, and a lot of the people who cared about me were advising me not to do this, because striking out on your own is highly risky, and there was some fear that my personal problems would exert themselves. And I tried to find a way to do something else. However, I was in New Haven, Connecticut, where there are 2 hospitals, and if you're not at one, if you belong to one at one time, you don't work in the other one. So there weren't really any other institutional opportunities for me. I looked at other consulting firms to join consulting firms, but that wasn't going to work out. The one that was possible was in Boston, and I couldn't commute back and forth. Eunice Lorenz, a colleague of mine who was an entrepreneur for many years before I started, encouraged me. She knew primary nursing, she knew her knowledge base, and she said, you know, I think you can make a go of it as an independent consultant. I think you should try. There was another well-known consultant who I asked for advice. She lived on the East Coast too, and I asked her for advice, and she said she would be happy to give it to me at $50 an hour. Well, that was a week's groceries for my kids and I, and I couldn't do that. But it taught me something, and I never, never, never have done that to another nurse entrepreneur. Quite the contrary. I try to help people as much as I can to get started. So it was with a passionate belief in the benefit of primary nursing, a somewhat of a national reputation as a speaker. I had done some national work. And my business skills were absolutely non-existent. I didn't understand why I should form a corporation. I didn't know how to develop a checking account for a business. I mean, everything was learning from scratch. And, it was a wonderful journey. It was just a wonderful journey. And somewhere along the way, I learned to apply common sense to the business questions, and that was wonderful too.
Now, there are probably some questions that I haven't asked. Are there any questions that you can think of that you'd like to answer, or pieces of information that you think would be very helpful to student nurses?
I think for student nurses, I would encourage student nurses to recognize that nursing is an incredible journey, that there are learning opportunities in every single interaction that you have. And the only time nursing can become boring, whether it's with patients or no matter whether you're an educator or no matter what you're doing, is when you turn your mind off. And if you find yourself being bored by what you're doing in nursing, look around and see what you can do to learn something new, because the opportunities are endless. I think that as nurses we are given this exquisite opportunity to learn how to live by watching and understanding how our patients live. We can see what works and what doesn't work. We're just given access to an incredible amount of experiential knowledge about life if we choose to pay attention and learn from it. So I think no matter what kind of a position a nurse holds, because we're dealing with people, there's an inexhaustible source of energy and education available to us.
Great. Well, Marie, thank you so much. It's really been
It was a pleasure
talking
Jane.
with you.
Yeah, you
this
too.
This has been terrific.
Well,
Thanks.
Thank you very much too.